All right, welcome everyone. It's 2 minutes after, so we'll go ahead and get started. But thank you all for joining our June monthly TEP meeting. Today is a very exciting meeting as we'll be initiating the vote for the long COVID data elements analysis spreadsheet. So here is our agenda for today. I will just do a quick recap of the eCare project objective, our deliverables, and then a little bit about the domain identification process that we've been undergoing for the last few months. And then we will enter a discussion around specific data analysis spreadsheet. And then Jerry Sills, our long COVID co-chair, will chair the beginning of the vote and discussion around that vote. And then we'll wrap up the meeting today with a few next steps. So just some quick housekeeping. Live transcription is available. If you want to turn that feature on, it should be available to you. Please use the hand raising feature if you want to comment, and just wait until a facilitator calls on you before speaking. And then feel free to use the chat at any time during the meeting to share any thoughts, questions, feedback. We'll be checking that regularly. And then just, of course, be mindful to allow participation from folks who haven't spoken up, just so we ensure a balanced participation across this whole group. Jenna and Arlene, I wonder, did you want to say any few words before we dived in? Totally optional, but in case.
Sorry, sure. Thanks. Just say thank you, everybody, for your continued participation. We really appreciate all of your input, and this would not be possible without all of you. So thank you.
I'll just second what Jenna said. We have a full meeting, so we just really want to get to the meat of the meeting. So go ahead, Karen. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so in terms of a quick recap, this whole effort kind of started along with this notion of enabling a comprehensive shared care plan. So this is the definition that we are using. It was defined by a HHS stakeholder panel, multi-group stakeholder panel 2015. And it essentially says that it gives the person direct access to their health data. The person's goals are at the center of all the decision making. So you'll see that we're very much focused on that throughout the project. It is holistic, which means that it includes clinical data as well as data from across all these various different settings. So home, community-based, social determinant needs and services. It follows the data through both the acute high need episodes, as well as periods in between for health improvement and maintenance, which is very important for the population of multiple chronic conditions. And then it also allows for care team coordination. So all this data would be able to be shared with the entire care team. So that's both providers as well as caregivers, the patients themselves, any other allied professionals, etc. So care plan that we're working with. And that brings us to the primary objective of this project. So the multiple chronic conditions eCare project is co-led by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And I'm sorry, I just got a note saying I was cutting in and out. All right, hopefully the audio is not too bad. So the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, as well as NIH, National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases. And the objective of this project is to build capacity for pragmatic patient-centered outcomes research by developing an interoperable electronic care plan to facilitate aggregation and sharing of patient-centered data across all these various settings for people with multiple chronic conditions. And there are three primary deliverables associated with this project, which is a 5-year project. We are currently in year 3. So this first deliverable is around data element identifications, building of value sets, clinical information models, and fire mappings. And the 5 domains that we are focused on right now can be seen on the right. So chronic kidney disease, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, chronic pain. And the work of this current TEP is to identify the data elements related to long COVID conditions. The second deliverable is an HL7 Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource, aka FHIR, implementation guide. And this basically defines use cases and the standardized data elements identified in deliverable 1 for implementers, providers. There's a large variety of stakeholders that will use a implementation guide for different things. And then our third deliverable is a patient-facing, clinician-facing, and caregiver-facing eCare planning applications. And these are smart on fire web-based applications that for the clinician can be launched directly from an EHR, and for the patient and caregiver, it can be launched as a standalone. Yes, thank you, David Dora. Thank you for all your work. So we are work on that is underway. The first versions of these apps, and just to clarify, there are 2 apps for this application. The patient and the caregiver facing app is a combined application. So we are currently in building version 2 of these applications and working in very close partnership with RTI International and OHSU, who is the pilot site where these apps are being tested. And so the arrow is pointing at the first deliverable, which is the current work of this TEP. And just to provide a little bit more context on this overall project, it's organized into 2 silos: the development piece, which is led by NIDDK, and then the real world testing piece, which is led by AHRQ. And EMI advisors, that's where I am working from, the identifying the data elements with the TEP, building the IG, and building the applications. And our work is informed primarily by the technical expert panels, so all of you, as well as the HL7 patient care work group. And then the real world testing piece is over here and led by ARC, and then the federal partner committee, and we have a third-party contract monitoring board that informs the project at a high level. So technical expert panels are the backbone for development, so we very much appreciate all of your work. I am almost done, so I apologize for the audio challenges. So these are the care planning components. This is a straightforward definition of, we broke it into 5 components here, and then care coordination kind of rolls across all of these components. And to identify the long COVID domain for deliverable 1, we have used these 5 buckets, as well as the care coordination piece, to guide some of the identification and fire mapping for these data elements. And so on the bottom, you'll see the standard, we're using FHIR, and then the National Library of Medicine houses, makes available the Value Set Authority Center, which is that are defined is housed. This is just a little bit about our iterative process. And we have been working in a cyclical fashion where the TEP members prioritizes data element concepts and provides clinical definitions. And then the EMI standards and terminology SMEs work together with the TEP to determine whether a data concept needs a value set or if it can be represented in FHIR constructs. And the 2 options here are 2 ways that we can standardize the data needed for exchange anymore. But in the first step that we took is this data element gathering spreadsheet, where we kind of did a high level brainstorm of everything that kind of comes to mind among the TEP that is relevant for long COVID. And we didn't really worry about hierarchies and prioritization and things like that. It was kind of just a brain dump of all the data elements and concepts that may be relevant. Then we took those inputs and put together this long COVID analysis spreadsheet, which is done by Himali, our SME, and Gay Dolan, our other SME, who have kind of gathered all these data concepts and organized them, found codes where the codes were appropriate, determined if a fire mapping would be appropriate there, and have put together the spreadsheet for review. And then the next step from the spreadsheet would be to build a value set if that's needed, or build a fire profile development if that's needed. I will pause there for questions and attempt to dial in my audio with that. So are there any questions? Okay. Hearing none, I will move over to the next agenda item, which is to discuss 3 topics that are still outstanding after initial review of the spreadsheet, which we shared out at the end of May. So the first one is around pre-existing conditions. And let me see if Hector is not on the call. I was going to put him on the spot. But a question came up from one of the TEP members on how do we capture worsening or worsening of a pre-existing condition, chronic condition that is associated with long COVID. And so I don't know if any TEP members want to share additional thoughts, or Jenna and Arlene wanted to perhaps weigh in on this. But from our perspective, we are exploring the best way to represent this this data concept and ability in the IG. And so one specific area where we're going to continue this discussion is on the June 23rd. There's a patient care work group is having a fire meeting at that time, and we have put on the agenda to discuss this because there is pre-existing discussion around this specific topic of worsening pre-existing conditions. So I will, Himali or Gay, if there's anything you would like to add, or Jenna, Arlene, or any of the TEP members, if you want to talk about this topic a bit further, I'll open the floor to that.
So I'll just acknowledge, oh, sorry, go ahead,
Go
Arlene.
ahead, Jenna. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there are 2 key aspects of capturing worsening of pre-existing chronic conditions following long COVID. And I think one of them, is sort of the research perspective, wherein I think the approach would likely be to, identify the onset of COVID or long COVID, which would be a data element, and then use other data elements on the status of the conditions to assess whether they've worsened, right? So, being a kidney person, I'll use kidney disease just as an example, where you might say, following long COVID, is there any change in UACR or eGFR, measures of kidney function and damage for the population? And then I think for the individual care of patients, which I think is also, of course, relevant to the care plan, I think that's where this second approach, where there's ongoing HL7 discussion, where we would actually create a data element that, or some fire structure that enables the capture of sort of following long COVID, or following some other event, in this case long COVID, the condition got better, got worse, and so on. And I think I think this framework could apply to other affecting events aside from long COVID as well, and you could imagine it being applied for medication, right? So if the medication were the event, you might want to know, did this medication work to improve the condition? Did it stay the same? Did it get worse? So I think having a flexible framework for that kind of thing could be really useful. So I think that's sort of some of the initial conversations that we've had in this space in response to Hector's comment.
Yeah, and I just want to briefly add, I mean, we all know how long COVID is, affects multiple organ systems, and the fact that we're developing something that's patient-centered for multiple chronic conditions. And it also affects the same organ systems where people have chronic disease. So for example, if you have additional, pulmonary dysfunction due to long COVID or cardiac, like how do we capture that? So it's really there's kind of that interaction between, pre-existing conditions and then the impact of long COVID as well as worsening of the disease itself.
Yeah, I mean, I want to second that a little bit. This is the Luco hope. I mean, particularly in the context of not having a full definition, right? Like, for example, like in the sleep domain and in let's say somebody has OSA, obstructive sleep apnea, and there may be sort of a misclassification of the worsening obstructive sleep apnea, which may be true, but also may be a misclassification and it may be insomnia from long COVID. Same with something like shortness of breath, which is very generic. Somebody has a history of asthma. For months, it might be called worsening asthma, when in some later context might then turn out to be long COVID. So I think there is sort of the true worsening of pre-existing conditions, say something like diabetes, where there is like a hemoglobin A1C or like some other thing. And then there is sort of this mixture of spaces where like sometimes chronic conditions are being thought to be worse in the context of what really is long COVID. And I don't know.
Did you get cut off?
So I was just trying to figure out if it was me or if it was a Luco.
Yeah, same here.
Yes, he's in the chat.
Yeah, well, if I may, while he gets back, I was having the same concern. It's like, how do we distinguish from the natural history of disease and how a particular organ system deteriorates over time versus long COVID, and the metrics will be different depending on what the pre-existing condition is.
So I guess I would offer that I don't know that we can fully answer that question ourselves through this project. What I would propose is that we think through this question to make sure that we have the right data standards in place such that it would enable future researchers to answer that question, if that makes sense, right? So I think
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we'd want to make sure we have the right health status metrics, like looking through, the right health concerns, health status, symptoms, elements, so that we can capture those things and track them and try to understand, is this long COVID something new or an exacerbation of an existing condition? And, we may not know enough yet at this point in where we are with long COVID to be able to do that in every case. But I think we just need to do our best effort to put forward the standards that we can that would facilitate answering those questions. So perhaps looking through the symptoms data elements and other existing data elements that we have, just to make sure that what we have there, that there's nothing missing that would better enable us or equip us to answer that type of question.
So if we return to Hector's example, I think his example was people diagnosed with type 2 diabetes who are now qualified as type 1 diabetes, and the spreadsheet will in fact allow for that to be coded. So I think in many cases, as Jenna said, the spreadsheet and the various terms that are being used will be able to at least capture this in many cases.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So in the interest of time, I will move us on to the next discussion topic. And is my audio, I hope my audio is better. Okay. So our next topic is the approach for intervention. So this is definitely one of those areas where we are trying to kind of introduce the notion of using the FHIR specification to include, to be able to enable flexibility in which data elements we're able to exchange as it relates to interventions. So on the left-hand side, you'll see here medication request and service request. And these are two FHIR resource specifications that enable all of these categories that you see in the middle. So medication request includes medications. So these are over the counter as well as prescription. It includes immunizations, and I believe Audi asked whether or not the COVID vaccine, you can specify which manufacturer the vaccine was made from. So when it says COVID vaccine, you can have all those, the manufacturer, the type, like all that information included and be able to be shared. For service requests, there are a bucket of diagnostic procedures and tests. So there are clinical tests, radiology services, lab tests. And then in terms of more treatment focused things, so referrals and consults, therapeutic procedures, complementary and alternative medicine, behavioral therapy and interventions, and then education, both for the patient as well as the caregiver. So the PASC Care is really just a hope for the understanding that it's really the FHIR specification allows us to be very broad and very flexible in terms of all the elements of data that may be exchanged as it relates to diagnosis, treatment, care planning for a patient that has a suspected or confirmed case of long COVID. Any questions or thoughts in reaction to this approach? Okay, so Aluka has a question for how we will capture education. And is Gay on the line? I think, Gay, would you be able to explain that?
So, excuse me, there's two aspects. One would be the request for some sort of education or counseling that you see right here. And then otherwise, the provision of education, the different types of education in the same categories that would be requested would be via a procedure, the procedure performed. So even though you might not think of education as a clinical procedure from the representation perspective, it is. And then you can even relate in FHIR the request to the procedure performed and vice versa. Did that answer the question? Okay.
Yeah, you said thanks.
That's some audio issues. Thanks. All right.
And Karen, to your question, yes. It's very flexible. And the other thing I should note too is that the examples on the right in the text are just examples. It's not a comprehensive list of all the interventions, whether diagnostic or treatment or otherwise, that can be captured through the FHIR specification. Okay. All right. I will move us on to the last piece, which are the assessment scales. So you may have noticed, if you had a chance to look at the analysis spreadsheet, there is an entire tab dedicated to assessment scales. So we just had a few specific questions on this. And I would also say that
there are other assessment scales that were identified for previous domains under this project, and these are included in the IG. So, but we definitely want you to flag if there are assessment scales as it relates to long COVID that you don't see here, and we will cross-reference with previous scales that have been created and just make sure it's all inclusive. But two very specific questions first. So not to put you on the spot, Dr. Dorr, but there was a spreadsheet that you had sent us that referenced a dyspnea scale. And we were just wondering if there was a link for the scale that you had in mind for that symptom.
Was it the MMRC?
I think Dr. Dorr left, but it's possible. We just had dyspnea scale, so that's the extent of the information. But
because I think he was referring to the one that we use at OHSU. I think it's the MMRC, the Modified Medical Research Council Dyspnea Scale. But I don't want to speak for him, but I'm assuming that's because we're at the same institution.
Yeah, it's likely right, because I'm pretty sure that spreadsheet came from you. So
yeah.
that he shared along. Okay.
Yeah, so it's 0 to 4. Yeah.
Okay. Himali, does that give you the information needed?
Yeah, can you repeat the name of the scale one more time?
I'll type it in the chat. So.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. And then there's also the a GI scale for symptoms that requires licensing. So this is more just a note that if there is a scale that's referenced that requires licensing, we would need to just clarify that in the IG. So our main question that we had for you all are, what assessments need to be given to caregivers in the context of caring for a patient with long COVID? And then also about multiple chronic conditions in general. So just a little bit of feedback on our assessment scales. We had identified PROMIS 29 as well as the PHQ-9 for patients, but added that this would also be applicable for assessing caregivers. So are there any other assessments that would be helpful from the caregiver perspective? Okay, Aluka wrote IQ code.
We don't use it in the long COVID context that commonly, but certainly it's been a questionnaire that we will use for cognitive assessments from caregivers' perspectives if like you're concerned about changes in memory or cognitive function.
Okay.
Yeah, Karen, this is Katie Brandt. You know, I see somebody just put the caregiver strain index. The other one to consider is, do you have the Zaret caregiver burden survey? So that's a little different, right? That is thinking about, so if we have assessments thinking about for the caregivers, what do you want to look at for the patient? Or as a clinician, if you see that a caregiver of your patient is highly stressed, that could be an indicator that a risk factor for your patient. So it's just another way for the clinician to assess risk or protective factors, really.
Right, I agree. That's why I was looking at this caregiver strain index as well, because with long, it's a long trajectory, can be a long trajectory. And certainly the wear and tear on caregivers is something that absolutely directs, patient care. So that's why I was suggesting maybe something that kind of pulled a lot of things together, from financial strain to emotional adjustments, physical strain, et cetera, et cetera. So just a thought.
So we'll definitely add that in our list.
Thank you.
I think we may have lost Karen.
Yep, I think we did. So give me just a moment. I will pull up the slides and get us back going.
Great, thanks.
Regarding Bill's comment in the chat, we do have social determinants of health captured under the broader multiple chronic conditions project that we've been working on. So we don't have them on the long COVID spreadsheet, but we are capturing social determinants of health. And we're following Gravity in that space. So Gravity is an HL7 project that's focused specifically on data standards for social determinants of health. And we also identified some additional elements of our own that Gravity is not yet working on, and happy to send that list around for anybody who'd like to see it. Yeah, so look, I'll put the link in the chat here in just a second.
Yeah, and the last bullet here, some of the questionnaires that have been proposed or mentioned are currently not encoded with LOIC question and answers, which is one of the main methods that we are advising to be used in conjunction with a standard called structured data capture, and some tooling that the NIH has put out to that support automatic generation of these questionnaires, as well as much more detail about how to derive observations from those questionnaires. And those are, as far as I'm aware, those are all pretty much requiring the LOIC structure and the LOIC panel codes for questionnaires. And so we're putting out a question with folks within HL7 about how to handle it when there's just a locally implemented or not yet encoded questionnaire. Is there particular guidance in that particular implementation guide for it? And I haven't found it yet, but hopefully they'll be able to point us to it.
Thank you, Faye, for explaining that. I think the next slide just reviews some of our value set status that we've been working on. I didn't know if either you or Kamali wanted to speak to this, or we can move on. I believe the next section will start the vote discussion.
So I can quickly go over this slide. Basically, this slide represent all the diagnosis and basically the diagnosis of long COVID and related comorbidities. So what we have done is that for long COVID diagnosis, since it is a diagnosis, we have used Synomed CT and ICD-10 classification systems to build those codes, and those are grouped together. So all the diagnosis and comorbidities will have a group or value set that will include the data from two terminology systems, Synomed CT and ICD-10. And what we have done in this list is that we have reviewed the prior built value sets from prior multiple chronic conditions. So there were existing value sets for diabetes, chronic kidney disease, congestive heart failure, tuberculosis, obesity, PTSD, and dementia, which you can see on the right side. So we haven't rebuilt those because we want to use the prior work as much as possible. So we will be referring to the existing value sets where it is possible. But anything that we identified as a long COVID comorbidity and does not exist is on the left-hand side, where we have created new value sets for those. So this slide just represents the long COVID diagnosis and associated comorbidities related value sets. Next slide. So this spreadsheet lists all the symptoms related to long COVID And this has been identified by all the TEP members. And once we finalize the list for the long COVID symptoms, we went ahead and built all these value sets in PASC. We have built it and I have submitted it, and Kay is in process of reviewing it. Once she agrees with it, we will be publishing all these value sets. But currently they are in the draft and submitted status, and we have created a link. Basically, I have downloaded all these value sets and created a link which is posted on the conference page for multiple chronic conditions. So anyone who has no access to PASC can just download that list as a Excel spreadsheet and review it for the completeness. And if you have any feedback on that, we would always appreciate it. And we would, this is a dynamic process, and the value sets can be updated as and when needed for next year or so. So if you feel that something is missing, your feedback is extremely helpful, and we would really appreciate your feedback on that. So along with what is there currently, if you feel some specific symptom is missing, we can also build a value set for that. But this is pretty much the comprehensive list of what we think covers long COVID symptoms. So any questions here?
Thanks, Somali. Apologies for that. So now I would like to hand it over to Jerry, who will talk us through the voting process and oversee that process. So Jerry.
Thank you, Karen.
Before you go on, this is Shelley Sparrow of the Pharmacy HIT Collaborative. Is going back to the previous question, is there a process that will continue on as things might change to update the value sets, and who's responsible for doing that?
So technically, patient care work group is the standards of all of the, is the steward for all of the value sets that are being developed. And you know, the first bit is getting to ballot and through ballot, and you know, likely there might be some changes suggested there. And then I would imagine what seems to be a good approach with value set updating, it would be some sort of an annual assessment, similar to what is done in both US Core and CCDA, to determine if there is needed to be additional updates needed.
So Gay, thank you for that. Additional to that, so is that going to fall under the patient care work group, who will be responsible for updating that, or is that something that ARC and NIH or NIDBK will be building in to the model?
That's a great question. Responsibility falls on patient care, but typically there will be individuals involved in the patient care work group that perform the actual stewardship duties.
And then I'm making an assumption, so Gay, correct me if I'm wrong, but if patient care does do the updates, does that require it to be reballoted for the value set?
No, not necessarily. No, but not if the value sets are not, if the scope is not changed. So the intent and the scope of the value set is the same, and it's just new codes have been brought in because of deficiencies or because of changes in hierarchies, then no. So not unless it's a scope change or switching out a value set.
And I would recommend for this process to be written out as a policy. Not sure where it would sit, but I think it's an important policy moving forward, because it's one of the things that we've run into with the Pharmacy HIT Collaborative on the pharmacist care plan are the updates to the value set, and we had to put a process in place to actually do that. And so I think it's important for this project to make sure that that's clearly defined as how, because people add codes or need to add codes, and if it's not there and that process isn't outlined, it does tend to be a problem.
Definitely.
Okay, if I can move on.
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being at this meeting and for your continuing participation in the TEP. I wanted to say a little bit about what we're going to be doing for the next few minutes. So a hybrid e-vote approach has been adapted from Robert's rules. I'll co-chair the vote, and we're going to entertain a motion at some point soon. As given Robert's rules, somebody will have to second it. If it is to move on, we'll have open the floor for discussion and debate. And then I will tell people about how the e-vote will be occurring. So, and again, to consider, this is going to be a vote about approving the content of the long COVID data element spreadsheet in terms of its direction, in terms of the direction it is taking now. So the next step would be really to think about how this is going to work. So how is this e-vote going to work? You're going to be receiving, all TEP members, except for me, will be receiving a SurveyMonkey link. And you can vote until Tuesday of June 14th. And we're going to ask, we're giving people a variety of categories. So the first one would be a yes vote. And what it means is that the deliverable may not be the ideal one from the perspective of the TEP member, but it's moving forward in a direction that is quite reasonable. And that vote of yes would mean it moves forward and the deliverable is not blocked. The second possibility is yes with a comment, where the TEP member reviews, addresses a comment by saying yes with comment, and then indicates what that comment is. And that will at some point be under consideration for the possibility of revision. If no comment is provided, the vote will be considered to be a yes vote. If there is a formal objection made, then we request that someone include a comment or comments that include, indicate what way they would like these forms, these data spreadsheets, what form it should take or what they think it should take to meet their concerns. And we'll consider that to be that'll be a no, but if it's a formal objection without a comment, that'll be considered as abstain. And if someone doesn't vote, of course, that will be considered to be an abstention. So now let's move on to the next phase. What we're really asking for is if anyone would make a motion that concerns the long COVID data element spreadsheet.
Jerry, this is Katie Brandt. I would like to make a motion to approve the content in the long COVID data element spreadsheet in terms of the direction of the data elements identified and the alignment with the objective of the project, while acknowledging that the nature of the data elements identified will continue to change due to emerging evidence around long COVID, updates in the codes available, and changes in the fire specification.
Do I have a second?
This is Shelley Spiro. I second it.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Now we'd like to open the floor for discussion. That can occur either through, well, it can occur out loud or it can occur in terms of the chat. And we'll leave some time open for people's comments about that. It doesn't sound like, based on the chat and based on what I'm hearing, people are don't have any comment, which would suggest that we should move on. But I want to make sure we're really giving people time to express their opinion at this point. So let's take another minute. Okay. I'm going to ask, I don't know if Karen, you can do this yet, but have you seen anything in the chat that's relevant to discussing this?
No, we have the, I think Audi just asked about
Right.
A, and then PASC is included. So apart from those two notes, I don't, if I missed anybody else's notes, please let me know.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up. You will be receiving an email with that link and instructions. And please do cast your vote. And Karen, take it away. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience.
Thank you, Jerry. So I just shared the link in the chat, and we will also send it out later today. But this is basically what the form looks like. So just a reminder of what the motion is, a link to the spreadsheet. We will also be putting a recording of the meeting today in case anybody wants to review that before casting your official vote. But casting the vote is fairly simple: full name, email, certify whether you're a member of the TEP or not, and then put in your formal vote. And if you voted yes with comment or formal objection, please leave your comment or formal objection comment here and just click done, and your vote will be counted. So voting will close on a week from now, so June 14th by 6 p.m. Our next TEP meeting is on July 5th, same time. And if anybody has any questions or thoughts, considerations, things of that nature, our proverbial door is always open, so feel free to shoot us an email, and we would be happy to discuss. With that said, that was our entire agenda for today. Thank you so much for your time and for your careful review of the spreadsheet. We know it's very overwhelming, but appreciate all of your work so far, and we look forward to our future meetings where we will continue to refine some of these improvements, respond to all the comments that we received via the vote, and then we look forward to discussing some of the other deliverables associated with the long COVID multiple chronic conditions project. So thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic day.